What happens when the most feared man in New Orleans hires the one woman every other employer in the city has already turned away, and his broken little girl refuses to let her leave? She wasn't a personal stylist or a certified child therapist. She was a 26-year-old waitress from the Treme who smelled like fryer oil and had exactly $43 in her checking account. But the night Tatum Briggs, no, wait, the night Odalis, no. Hazel, none of those names were available. The list was already spoken for. Her name was Gwen Mallory. And the night she walked through the wrought iron gates of the Arceneaux compound on the edge of the Garden District, she had no idea she was walking into the only place in the world she had ever truly belonged. Remy Arceneaux was 41 years old, and he had not smiled, genuinely, not performatively, in 14 months. He ran the Gulf Coast's most powerful criminal syndicate from a 19th-century mansion that had survived 3 hurricanes and 2 federal investigations, neither of which had managed to touch him. He controlled the port authorities, the Longshoremen's Union, 2 city council seats, and most of the private security contracts from Baton Rouge to Biloxi. He wore hand-tailored linen suits because New Orleans' heat was unforgiving even to the powerful. He kept his dark hair cut close and his jaw shaved clean, because disorder in his personal appearance was something he had long decided he could not afford. His reputation had been built methodically, surgically, over 20 years, on the absolute principle that Remy Arceneaux did not crack. And then his wife Solange had died of a brain aneurysm on a Tuesday afternoon in September, and his 5-year-old daughter Beauclair had not spoken a single word since. Not one. The specialists called it selective mutism brought on by acute grief. 3 different child psychiatrists from Tulane Medical had explained, in varying degrees of clinical patience, that it was not permanent, that it was the child's way of processing loss, that with the right environment and the right support, she would come back to them. What they did not explain was how to find the right environment inside a house that felt like a mausoleum, staffed by people who walked on eggshells and whispered in hallways, because the boss was grieving and dangerous and not to be tested. What they did not explain was how to find the right support when every nanny, every caretaker, every certified child specialist Remy had brought into that house had lasted an average of 11 days before tendering their resignation. Not because Beauclair was violent. She wasn't. She was heartbreakingly quiet. She sat in the center of whatever room she occupied like a small, dark-eyed ghost, holding a worn stuffed rabbit named Fig against her chest, and she watched the adults around her with an expression that seemed far too old for a 5-year-old face. The problem was that she refused to engage. She wouldn't eat meals prepared by the household cook. She wouldn't respond to educational games or story time, or any of the carefully structured activities the specialists had recommended. She slept badly and cried in the night silently, without calling out for anyone, and that silence was somehow worse than screaming. The nannies left because they didn't know what to do with a child who had essentially decided the world was not worth participating in, and Remy, who could dismantle a rival operation with 2 phone calls, had absolutely no idea how to reach his own daughter. His enforcer, a quiet, efficient man named Corbin, who had been with him for 12 years, was the one who finally suggested trying the agency again. The last placement failed, Remy said, not looking up from the shipping manifest on his desk. The last placement was a woman with a master's degree in early childhood development, who cried in her car every day at lunch, Corbin said. I'm suggesting we try a different kind of person. What kind? Somebody who's not afraid of hard rooms. Gwen Mallory had been waiting tables at Café Renard on Magazine Street for 4 years, and in that time she had been passed over for every promotion, ignored for every raise, and told twice, once by a manager and once by a customer who felt entitled to say it out loud, that she might want to consider a job that didn't require her to be on her feet. She was 5'3" and weighed 260 pounds, and had the kind of face that people described as pretty though. The though doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. She had warm brown skin, natural hair she kept pinned back at work, and hands that were perpetually chapped from washing dishes during the rushes when they were understaffed, which was always. She was also, by any honest account, the best employee Café Renard had ever had. She remembered orders without writing them down. She managed the difficult tables, the ones with the complaining out-of-toners and the over-served bachelorette parties, with a steadiness that the younger servers openly envied. She had a way of walking into a tense situation and simply lowering the temperature of it, not by saying the right thing, but by being unhurried and unshaken in a way that made the people around her unconsciously recalibrate. None of that had translated into anything useful, professionally speaking. When the call came from the Bellerose domestic agency at 7:15 on a Thursday morning, Gwen was sitting on the fire escape of her apartment on Dauphine Street, eating leftover red beans and rice, because the stove burner had gone out again and she hadn't had time to call the super. Her student loans, nursing school 2 years, before she'd had to drop out when her mother's dialysis costs escalated, were 90 days past due. Her landlord had slid a notice under her door the previous Friday that she had read once, and then placed face down on the kitchen counter, because she wasn't ready to look at it again yet. She had signed up with Bellerose 3 weeks earlier on a whim, or something that felt like a whim, but was actually desperation wearing a calmer face. Miss Mallory. The woman on the phone had the clipped, careful tone of someone accustomed to managing expectations. I have a placement. It's residential, garden district, immediate start. The compensation is substantially above standard rate, paid weekly, in cash. Gwen set down her fork. How substantially? 5 times the base rate. The fire escape railing was digging into her back. She straightened. What's the catch? A brief pause. The client is a widower. His daughter is 5. She has not spoken in over a year due to grief. Previous placements have not been successful. Another pause, more deliberate. The client himself is. The environment is not conventional. You understand what I mean by that? Gwen understood. New Orleans had its own specific grammar for that kind of not conventional. She'd grown up 3 blocks from a family whose front business was a dry cleaner, and whose actual business was something no one on the block discussed openly. She knew what wrought iron gates and men in suits standing outside a house at 2 in the afternoon meant. I'm not easily rattled, Gwen said. It was not bravado. It was just true. The last placement lasted 9 days, the woman from Bellerose said. Why'd she leave? She said. The house felt like it was holding its breath. Gwen looked out at the rooftops of the quarter, the pale morning light catching the rust on the gutters. She thought about the notice lying face down on her kitchen counter. Tell them I'll be there at noon. The gate guard looked her over the way. Gate guards at houses like that always looked over people who arrived on foot, which was to say with a practiced blankness that communicated everything without saying a word. She gave her name. He checked a list. The gates opened. The driveway was lined with old live oaks, their branches so heavy and interlocked overhead that the light came through in pieces. The house at the end of it was enormous and pale yellow with black shutters, gallery porches running the full length of both floors, and the particular kind of quiet that very old, very serious money generates. Gwen was sweating by the time she reached the front steps. Her interview blouse, a navy blue wrap top she'd bought second-hand and ironed 3 times that morning, was doing its best, but it was August in New Orleans, and her best clothes were not built for August in New Orleans. She was aware of her size in the way she was always aware of it when she was walking into a situation where someone was going to decide something about her. A low-grade hum of self-consciousness that she had learned, over years, to push to the back of her mind and keep there. Corbin met her at the door. He was lean and unhurried and looked at her, without the dismissive flicker she'd half expected. "Mr. Arceneaux will see you in the study," he said, and led her through a foyer with 12-foot ceilings and floors of wide plank cypress that creaked softly underfoot. The study was floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a single window that faced the back garden. Remy Arceneaux was standing at it with his back to the door when she came in, which she suspected was deliberate. He turned around. He was taller than she'd expected, with the kind of physical stillness that isn't relaxation, but its opposite. Control held so continuously it had become indistinguishable from calm. His eyes were very dark and very direct, and they moved over her in a single unhurried assessment that took in everything without lingering anywhere. "Miss Mallory," he said. His voice was low and carried the soft edges of old New Orleans money, the kind of accent that had been carefully maintained across generations. "Sit down." She sat. He remained standing, which was a power move she recognized and had decided in advance not to react to. "You have no formal childcare credentials," he said. No training in child psychology or grief counseling. No, then explain to me why the agency sent you." Gwen looked at him steadily. "I think they ran out of people with credentials who were willing to come back a second time." Something shifted in his expression, not quite amusement. More like the recognition of an unexpected quality in a material he was testing. "My daughter does not speak," he said. "She has not spoken in 14 months. She does not respond to structured activities, therapeutic intervention, or the 7 different specialists I have paid considerable amounts of money to send into this house. She does not eat regularly. She does not sleep through the night, and she has not laughed since before her mother died." He paused. "Every caretaker I have hired has ultimately found the situation too emotionally difficult to continue. I need someone who will not leave." Gwen thought about her apartment, the notice on the counter, her mother's next dialysis appointment, which was in 11 days, and the gap between what insurance covered and what it didn't. "I don't leave," she said simply. He studied her for a long moment. She didn't look away. "You'll take your meals in the kitchen, and have Sundays off, which you are free to spend however you choose within the property or outside it. Your quarters are in the East Wing, adjacent to Beauclair's room. Corbin is available if you need anything the household staff can't provide." He said it all in the tone of a man closing a business arrangement. "Is there anything you need to tell me before we proceed?" Gwen thought of Mickey Sullivan. No, wrong story, wrong city, wrong woman. She thought of the loan she'd taken from a private lender 8 months ago to cover 3 months of her mother's out-of-pocket costs when the insurance appeal had been denied. The lender's name was Farrow, and he operated out of an office above a bail bond shop on Tulane Avenue, and he had been very pleasant when she signed the paperwork and considerably less pleasant in his most recent text message. "Nothing that would affect my work," she said. Remy Arceneaux nodded once, as though he'd expected exactly that answer and had already decided what to do about it. "Corbin will show you to your room. You can meet Beauclair this evening." Beauclair Arceneaux was small for 5, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's soft mouth and a cloud of black hair she allowed no one to brush. She was sitting on the floor of her bedroom when Gwen knocked and pushed the door open, surrounded by a careful arrangement of small objects, buttons, spools of ribbon, a few smooth river stones, and the worn stuffed rabbit fig, propped against the baseboard like a guest of honor. She looked up at Gwen without alarm. Children at that age usually reacted to new adults with either curiosity or wariness. Beauclair's expression was neither. It was watchful and patient, the look of someone who had been waiting a long time for something and had gotten very good at waiting. Gwen didn't introduce herself. She didn't crouch down to the child's level in the practiced, cheerful way she'd seen adults do with small children who weren't ready for it. She just stepped into the room, looked around, and sat down on the floor a few feet away from the arrangement of objects. Beauclair watched her. Gwen looked at the arrangement. The buttons were sorted by color. The ribbons were looped in small, precise coils. The river stones were placed in a line from largest to smallest. "You've been busy," Gwen said quietly, not directing it at the child specifically, just noting it. "Somebody's got a good eye for order." Beauclair's fingers moved slightly against Fig's ear. Gwen didn't press. She just sat there in the warm, lamplit room and let the silence be what it was. After approximately 7 minutes, Gwen counted them without looking at her watch. Beauclair picked up a green button from the pile and set it down precisely between herself and Gwen. Gwen looked at it. Then she reached into her pocket, where she always kept a few things out of long habit: a rubber band, a coin, a small smooth piece of sea glass she'd found on the lakefront the previous spring. She took out the sea glass, which was pale blue-green and slightly translucent, and set it down next to the button. Beauclair looked at it for a long time, then she picked it up and held it to the light. Gwen watched the child's face change, something unlocking, just a fraction, behind the eyes. In the hallway outside, Corbin had been standing quietly, watching through the half-open door. He walked back to the study where Remy was working and said nothing for a moment. "Well?" Remy said without looking up. "She's sitting on the floor," Corbin said. Beauclair gave her a button. Remy put down his pen. The days that followed were not miraculous. Gwen had not walked into that house and fixed anything with warmth and willpower in the span of a week. Real children didn't work that way, and neither did real grief, and Gwen, who had sat with her own mother through 7 months of dialysis and the particular exhaustion of a body in slow retreat, understood that better than most. What she did was show up. Every morning at 7, she was in the kitchen when Beauclair came down, and she didn't make a production of breakfast. She just made it unpretentiously, in a way that smelled like something good. She'd grown up cooking for her younger brothers on a budget that required creativity, and she could make a plate of scrambled eggs and toast into something that actually looked worth eating. The first morning, Beauclair had stood in the kitchen doorway and watched her. The second morning, she sat at the kitchen table. The third morning, she ate half a piece of toast. The household staff noticed. They were a tight, practiced crew who had worked for the Arceneaux family for years, and who regarded new additions with the careful neutrality of people who had seen many new additions fail. By the end of the first week, the cook, a large, comfortable woman named Mrs. Elmore, who had been with the family for 9 years, had started leaving small portions of things out on the counter near Gwen's usual spot, as though by accident. "You don't have to do that," Gwen told her. "I'm not doing anything, Mrs." Elmore said, not turning around from the stove. Gwen understood. She started leaving small portions of things in return, not out of obligation, but because it felt right in a place where warmth had gone somewhat thin. Remy watched all of this from a distance. He was a man who had made a science of not intruding on processes that were working, and the process that Gwen ran with Beauclair was, by any measurable standard, working better than anything that had come before. He watched from hallways, from the gallery upstairs when they were in the back garden, from the study window when Gwen took the child on slow walks along the perimeter of the property, Beauclair's small hand tucked inside Gwen's larger one, Fig tucked under the child's other arm. He noticed as he watched that Gwen moved through the world in the way she moved through that house, without apology and without performance. She was a large woman in a house of people who were all, in various ways, armored against the world. She was not armored. She was simply present entirely, in a way that somehow made the space around her feel different. He noticed the clothes she'd arrived in, which were clean and pressed, but not new, and he spoke to Corbin about it, the way he spoke to Corbin about every practical matter that required action. He did not mention that he had started looking forward to the evenings, when he returned from meetings, when the sound of the house had shifted, when there was, occasionally, the sound of Gwen humming something low and unhurried in the kitchen, and Beauclair's small footsteps padding after her. Everything changed on a Wednesday in late October. Gwen had been in the house for 6 weeks. Beauclair had started initiating contact. Small touches, a hand on Gwen's arm, leaning against her when they sat together on the porch swing in the evenings. She had not spoken, but she had started leaving small objects outside Gwen's bedroom door, a particular ribbon, a stone, once as drawing, 2 figures, one large and round, one small, standing next to what appeared to be a tree. Gwen had picked up the drawing and held it for a long time before she tucked it carefully into the book on her nightstand. On the Wednesday in question, she had taken Beauclair to the small courtyard in the back where someone had, at some point, planted a kitchen herb garden that had since gone somewhat wild. Gwen had been slowly rehabilitating it on her days off, because she needed something to do with her hands when she was trying not to think. And Beauclair had started following her there, sitting on the stone bench and watching with the intense, focused attention she brought to everything. They were pulling mint when the rear gate opened without the usual radio clearance. Gwen didn't process it fast enough. She was on her knees in the dirt, and Beauclair was 2 feet away, and the man who came through the gate wasn't one of Remy's. He was a compact, unpleasant man in his 50s with a face like a fist and a manner that communicated without any ambiguity that he had come here because he had calculated that this was the one place he could find leverage. His name was Farrow. "Miss Mallory," he said pleasantly, "I've been having a hard time getting you on the phone." Gwen stood up slowly. She positioned herself between Farrow and Beauclair without making it look deliberate. "This isn't the place," she said quietly. "No, it isn't. Which is why I'm here instead of at that nice little apartment you're not paying rent on." He looked at the house, the garden, the walls. He looked at the small child on the bench, who had gone absolutely still in the way she went still when the world became frightening. "You've moved up in the world, Gwen. A place like this, a man like Arceneaux. People pay a lot to know things about a house like this. Gate schedules, patrol routes, which windows don't have camera coverage. I won't do that. You owe me $11,000. I'll pay it. Every cent. I'll have it inside 2 months. Farrow looked at Beauclair again. 2 months is a long time when people know where a little girl takes her morning walk. Gwen's hands were steady, but her voice when she spoke was very quiet. "Get out of this garden." Farrow smiled with his mouth only. "Friday. You know how to reach me." He looked at Beauclair one more time, the way a man looks at something he's identified as useful, and then he went back through the gate. Beauclair was pressed against Gwen's side before Gwen had even turned back around. The child's small fingers were clutched in the fabric of Gwen's shirt, and her face was buried against Gwen's ribs, and she was shaking. Gwen wrapped her arms around her and held on. "It's okay," she said, her voice lower and steadier than she felt. "He's gone. I've got you." For 3 days after that, Gwen functioned on about 4 hours of sleep a night, and the particular exhaustion of carrying a secret that was too large to carry alone. She was cheerful with Beauclair because the child needed her to be. She was pleasant with the staff because they had done nothing wrong. She was professional with Remy during the brief exchanges they had at dinner when he joined them, which had become more frequent over the preceding weeks. Something she had registered but not allowed herself to examine too closely. She was going to leave. She had decided it in the courtyard, and then undecided it, and then decided it again every day since. If she left, Farrow lost his leverage on this house. Beauclair would lose the only adult relationship she'd built in over a year, and Gwen would lose. She stopped cataloging what she would lose, because it had started to include things that weren't professionally appropriate to be losing. On Thursday night, Remy found her in the library. She was sitting on the window seat at midnight, with her knees pulled up, and a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, staring at the garden below. She heard him come in and didn't turn around. "You've been somewhere else for 3 days," he said. He didn't say it accusingly. He said it the way he said everything, with the particular precision of a man who chose his words because language had consequences. "I'm handling something," she said. He came to stand beside the window. She was aware of how close he was, the scent of cedar and something warmer underneath it. He looked down at the garden for a moment. "Corbin told me about the man at the rear gate on Wednesday," he said. She closed her eyes briefly. Of course Corbin had. "Remy," she started. "Tell me who he is," she told him. All of it. Her mother's illness, the loan, the amount, the threat he'd made about Beauclair's walk. She told it to the window because she couldn't look at him while she said it. When she was done, her voice was steady, which surprised her. "I was going to pack tonight," she said. "I thought if I left—" "If you leave," Remy said, and there was something in his voice she hadn't heard before. Not anger, but something underneath anger, something more fundamental. Beauclair loses the first person she's reached for in over a year. "And I lose," he stopped. She turned to look at him then. He was looking at her with an expression that Remy Arceneaux almost certainly did not show very many people. Not the controlled, assessing look she'd first seen in the study. Something rawer than that. "You're not leaving," he said. It wasn't an order. It was something closer to a plea, wearing the clothes of a statement. "This is my problem now. You brought it into this house, which means it is mine to handle. That's how this works." "I'm your employee," she said. "This isn't your Gwen." He said her name like it was the beginning of a longer sentence he'd decided to cut short. "Go to sleep. Let me do my job." Friday night in New Orleans was reliably loud everywhere except the particular block on Poydras Street where Pharaoh kept his after-hours office, which was quiet in the specific way of places that had gotten used to unpleasant things occurring in them. Pharaoh was expecting Gwen Mallory. He was not expecting the 3 black SUVs that filled the street at 11:45, or the 8 men in dark clothes who came out of them with the organized efficiency of people for whom this was not their first such visit, or the man who walked through the door of his office without knocking and stood in the center of it, occupying space the way mountains occupy space. Not through effort, but through the simple fact of what they are. Remy Arceneaux looked around the office with the calm expression of a man doing an inventory. "Pharaoh," he said, "I've been hearing your name for 3 days, and I find I'm tired of it." Pharaoh had enough self-preservation instinct to know that whatever leverage he'd thought he had evaporated the moment this man walked through his door. "Mr. Arceneaux," he started, "this is a private financial matter between me and—" "The debt is settled," Remy said. "Principal, interest, and the full balance as of tonight, which Corbin has already wired to whatever account you care to specify. Additionally," he took a step forward, "the woman who owed you that money is under my protection. The child in my house is under my protection. If either of their names passes through your mind in any context, other than how fortunate you are to still be having thoughts, you and I will have a very different conversation." He paused. "Are we clear?" Pharaoh nodded. The men in dark clothes withdrew. The SUVs left. Remy stood on Poydras Street for a moment in the warm October air and called Corbin. "It's done," he said. "Go home." He came back to the house at 1 in the morning. The downstairs lights were off except for the kitchen, where a single lamp was on above the counter. Gwen was sitting at the kitchen table. She had not packed. She had made coffee she wasn't drinking. The way she'd made tea she hadn't drunk the night before, and she was looking at the back door when he came in through it. She stood up. He was unhurt, entirely composed, and the expression on his face when he looked at her was the same one she'd seen the previous night. The one without armor. She crossed the kitchen and put her arms around him before she'd consciously decided to do it. And his arms came around her in the same instant, and for a long moment they just stood there in the lamplit kitchen that smelled of coffee and the remains of the cinnamon bread she'd baked that afternoon. "It's over," he said quietly against her hair. "He won't come back." She pulled back far enough to look at his face. "You didn't have to do that," "You know I did," he said. "Remy." She shook her head. "I'm a waitress from the Tremé. You're all of this." She gestured vaguely at the house, the compound, the entire factory. "I don't fit here." He looked at her for a long moment. She'd heard things like this said to her before, said kindly, said cruelly, said with the sort of patient condescension that was somehow worse than contempt. She'd always believed them. She'd been taught thoroughly and over many years that her body and her background and her circumstances added up to something that had a ceiling. "You fit," Remy said. He wasn't a man who said things he didn't mean. She had understood that about him within the first week. "You are the only person in 14 months who has made this house feel like a home, and that child feels safe. You are, Gwen." He stopped, the way he'd stopped the night before when he was about to say something more than he'd planned to. This time, he didn't cut it short. "You walked into this house, and you changed everything in it. That's not nothing. That's not a small thing. Don't apologize for being exactly who you are." She didn't apologize. She pulled him back in, and his arms tightened around her, and in the quiet kitchen in the Gardens district at 1 a.m, something that had been held carefully at arm's length for weeks finally gave way, as certain things will when the pressure is steady enough, and the foundation is real enough. 3 weeks later, Beauclaire Arceneaux stood at the kitchen counter with flour on her elbows, watching Gwen roll out dough. Gwen had been explaining, not for the first time, the particular logic of pie crust. Cold butter, quick hands, not overthinking it. To an audience of one who couldn't respond verbally but who tracked every movement with an intensity that was its own kind of conversation. "Okay," Gwen said, setting down the rolling pin and looking at the small flattened circle of dough. "What do you think? Too thin?" Beauclaire looked at the dough. She reached out one flour-dusted finger and pressed it gently into the center, testing. Then she looked up at Gwen, and in a voice that was very small and very careful, as though she was using a door she wasn't certain would still open, "More butter." The kitchen went completely silent. Gwen looked at the child. Her heart was doing something large and complicated inside her chest. She kept her face calm and warm because that was what the moment needed. Not tears, not drama, just the steady, safe presence that said, "Yes, you can come back. It's all right. We've been here the whole time." "More butter," Gwen agreed. "Absolutely more butter." Beauclaire nodded gravely and reached for the dish. Corbin, who had been walking past the kitchen doorway with a report for Remy, stopped. He looked at the scene. The big woman and the small girl elbow-deep in flour, the child's voice still hanging in the air like something just returned from a very long way away, and he turned around and went to the study without continuing down the hall. He opened the study door. Remy looked up. "She talked," Corbin said. Remy set down his pen. He was out of the study before Corbin finished the sentence, walking fast and then stopping in the kitchen doorway because he couldn't make himself interrupt what was in front of him. Gwen and Beauclaire were both focused on the pie crust, debating, in the way that one person can debate with another who is using mostly expression and gesture, the correct ratio of butter to flour. Beauclaire was saying something now, small words in her small, careful voice, and Gwen was listening with the full weight of her attention, nodding, considering each contribution as though it had genuine culinary merit. Remy Arceneaux stood in the doorway of his kitchen and felt something give way in his chest, the same thing that had been holding itself carefully together for 14 months, the thing beneath the control and the composure and the fortress he'd built out of competence, because grief was not something you could run a criminal empire on. Gwen looked up and saw him. She didn't say anything. She just smiled. The specific smile she had for moments that were too full for commentary, and turned back to the pie crust. He stayed in the doorway for a long time. The Gulf Coast Syndicate registered a change in its leader over the months that followed. He was no less precise, no less dangerous when the situation required it. But the house on the Garden District edge was different now. There was a child's laughter in it, irregular and still somewhat cautious but present, and the smell of something baking was reliable in the late afternoons, and the men who rotated through the front gate detail found, consistently, that there was something left out in the kitchen for them, and that the house felt inhabited in a way it had not felt in a long time. Gwen Mallory stayed. She was not a supermodel or a socialite or any of the predictable categories of woman that surrounded powerful men in stories like this one. She was a waitress from the Treme, who happened to be the only person Beauclair Arceneaux had spoken to in over a year, and the only person who had walked into that house without flinching at what it was, and the only one who had made Remy Arceneaux, at 41, understand that the thing he had been building all those years might have been missing a center of gravity the whole time. She was soft and stubborn, and entirely unimpressed by power, and absolutely certain of her own worth in a way that had nothing to do with what the world had told her. She was exactly right, and if you have ever stood at the edge of a room and watched someone change everything in it simply by being who they are, you already know there is no better or rarer thing in the world.